Hello, everyone. I got another deck today, and this one is actually a standard deck, not a historic deck. So, um, had to keep it within those confines, which is fine. Basically, the card I am quite interested in the new set, Ikoria, is this Ominous Seas. Obviously, a lot of people have been talking about it and messing around with it, so I thought I would take a shot at it. It's interesting because it's an uncommon and it's only 2 mana, which pretty good rate, honestly. It kind of plays like a rare, but it's not. So pretty good for trying to make more budget friendly decks in Arena. Um, Kind of the concept of this deck is, as I called it, Ominous Wheel, is you get Ominous Seas down, and then you have a bunch of ways of wheeling and discarding slash drawing a bunch of cards. That's basically the foundation of the deck. I see a lot of people using Ominous Seas or brewing Ominous Seas into control type strategies, which I think is viable, but this way I feel kind of, I don't know, it kind of makes Omninous Seas come on a lot online a lot faster. So, as I said, the cornerstone of the deck is Omninous Seas, and then I'm running 3 copies of Cathartic Reunion, and obviously this is a sorcery, an additional cost to discard 2 cards, and you draw 3 cards. So this is kind of feeding exactly into what you want to be doing on Omninous Seas. So, when obviously Omninous Seas, I will read it, is whenever you draw a card, put a 4 shadow counter on Omninous Seas, and then you can remove 8 4 shadow counters from Omninous Seas to create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. So basically, it just generates very large tokens. You can also cycle it for 2. Sometimes that's needed, but basically the meat is what you read there, and kind of the other things that make this deck spin, I guess. The cornerstones of the deck would also be Rael, the Everwise, and this card's super strong with discard slash draw type effects. Basically, she's a 3 mana, 1 generic, 1 blue and 1 red mana to cast. It's legendary. She's a 0/3, and she gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, which is a nice little bonus. But the real reason in this deck why she's useful is she has the text, whenever you discard 1 or more cards the first time each turn, draw that many cards. So that reads a little bit confusing, but basically what it means is the first time you cast some sort of effect that makes you discard a card, she will basically, every time that happens, the first time on each turn, so whether it's your turn or the opponent's turn, you will draw a card for each card you discarded that way. And that can be very powerful with a card like Omninous Sea, because obviously it is much greater impacting. It's basically a force multiplier on effects like Cathartic Reunion, and a lot of the other effects we'll see in this deck. Another kind of finisher in this deck, I guess, would be the card Channeled Force. This card works really well with Omninous Seas and Rael, because it's an instant for 4 mana, and as an additional cost to cast the spell, you discard X cards. So that works directly with Rael. So you can basically discard your whole hand. Say you have 5 cards, you discard 5 cards, and this makes target player draw X cards. So usually you draw X cards, so in this example 5, and then it does 5 damage in this instance, so X damage, to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker, so it's removal. And then in that instance, if you have Rael down as well, you would actually end up drawing 10 cards, because she doubles the amount of cards you draw for the first time each turn. And then the additional is kind of one more finisher, and that's Niv Mizzet Perun, which is obviously a very strong card. It's been around for a little while. It's not a new card, but as you can imagine, with these kinds of effects, he's very strong, because he says, well, he can't be countered. He's a 5/5 flyer, and whenever you draw a card, he deals 1 damage to any target. So that can be players, planeswalkers, or creatures. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So he kind of does everything you want in this deck, on top of being just very powerful himself. So some of the, I guess, support cards in the deck, like I said before, cards like Cathartic Reunion, which this discard effect can be kind of buffed substantially by Rael, which buffs Omninous Seas. As a 2-drop, I have Rick's Mighty Reveler. I'm not running any black mana, so the spectacle cost is kind of irrelevant. Basically, in this deck, he is a 2-mana 2/2 that when he enters the battlefield, you discard a card and draw a card, which doesn't sound super thrilling, but in a deck like this, where there's all this support for stuff like that, it's a pretty solid 2-drop. We also have Thrill of Possibilities, which is very similar to Cathartic Reunion, but it is a instant, and instead of discarding 2 cards and drawing 3 cards, you're discarding 1 card and drawing 2 cards. And 3-drop slot, we have this creature, which I wasn't super familiar with before. It kind of flew under my radar until I was building this deck, and it's called Glinthorn Buccaneer, and it is a 3-mana 2/4 haste. And the important text is whenever you discard a card, Glinthorn Buccaneer deals 1 damage to each opponent, which is great for all the discard effects we're running. This can add up. And he also has an activated ability for 1 and a red to discard a card and draw a card. And this is only able to be activated if he's attacking, which is a little awkward. He's not the strongest card in the deck, but it's a really solid 3-drop slot, and it kind of works into the whole theme here. And actually, on that same note, the other 3-drop here is very powerful and kind of works as removal in this deck, because it says whenever you draw your second card each turn, so once again that can be on your turn or the opponent's turn, or both, it deals 3 damage to any target. So that's really good. That works really well with Channel Force. You can really you can hit multiple targets off of a Channel Force and then this activated ability. And then my other 3-drop / 1-drop slot is Merchant of the Veil. This is a really good card because it is an instant that you can cast on the first turn, which is basically just a discard / draw, which normally is pretty ho-hum in a deck, but in a deck like this that's kind of built around that effect, it's quite strong. And then later on you can cast him. He's a 2/3 with an activated ability of discard a card, draw a card. So that's not exactly a game changer, but it is a very useful effect on a decent enough creature. And the last creature I'm running here is kind of it's not really a win condition. It's still, I would say, a support card, but it's the strongest of the support cards, and it is the Cavalier of Flame. And it's 5 mana, 3 red, 2 generic for a 6/5. And he has this activated ability, which isn't very useful in the deck, of 1 and a red, and creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. Not saying it's irrelevant, but he's that much. The important part is when he enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards. We've talked about this enough. That effect is very strong in this deck and can really do some damage. And really make you wheel and cycle through a lot of cards, get a lot of triggers on Omninous Seas. Yeah. And then the land setup's pretty standard. I got 2 Castle Vanitris. It's just kind of a good value land. If you have a high number of islands, it almost always comes in untapped, and it can get you a free scry. Steam Vents, pretty standard shock land. Temple of Epiphany, and once again it gives you a little free scry. I'm only running 2 because I don't really like that it comes in untapped, and then the rest are just islands and mountains. I'm gonna quickly cut away to some gameplay so I can show you kind of how the deck functions. Right, so here we go. Gonna hop into the gameplay here. It's a pretty decent opening hand. I have Steam Vents, 2 mountains, 2 channeled forces, Thrill of Possibility, and a Merchant of the Veil. So I can do the draw / discard off the Merchant of the Veil on their end step. As you notice, I do not have an Omninous Seas, which is not ideal for this deck, but I'm hoping, since this deck has a lot of ways of getting through large numbers of cards, I'm going to be able to find one. I decide to ditch the Steam Vents. I have plenty of color fixing, and there's not a ton of heavy mana pip cards in this deck. The only one really being the Cavalier of Flame and the Niv Mizzet. I guess there is a fair amount, but I didn't feel it was necessary to have the Steam Vents, and I didn't think there was going to be a turn recently, or in the near future, where I was going to be able to have it come in tapped, and I didn't really feel like paying it to life. As you can see, they're playing a ramp-based Simic deck. Well, I guess it's not Simic, but you know what I mean. It's kind of that shell. Here comes the Uro. Yep, classic ramp card. So the deck they're playing seems to be fairly strong. They're playing some decidedly strong cards, but we'll see how my deck fares against it. I think this kind of deck is a pretty good test to play it against. Not necessarily saying this deck is a tier 1 deck, but we'll see how it performs against one that is pretty high powered. Here I'm going to play a Thrill of Possibilities to just try to churn through as much of my deck as possible to try to find the Omninous Seas. The deck doesn't need the Omninous Seas in order to win, but it certainly helps. I'm able to pick up the Ironcrag Pyromancer, which is one of the main forms of removal in this deck, along with the Channel Force. As you can see, his deck's really ramping up pretty strong. He just played a Yarok, which is going to double his triggers. I just draw the Rael, which is quite strong. You'll have to forgive the gameplay a little bit. This is only the second time I've actually played the deck, so I don't know all of the interactions yet. But I've actually never seen that animation until I played her there. Pretty cool animation. Yeah, so he plays a second Uro, which doubles all the triggers off of Yarok. So he is certainly doing well, let's say. So he attacks with the Yarok. Obviously, Yarok has Death Touch, so I will not be blocking. Not really worth giving up a creature to. It's pretty funny. He's already at 38 life, quite a bit, you know. There's the Omninous Seas, so that's exactly what I want to see. No pun intended, but that is a hell of a card to pick up. Definitely something you want to have going in this deck for sure. Right now I'm kind of contemplating what to do because once again, like I said, I'd only played this deck one time before this. I decided to pull out the Channel Force, which you might think is kind of contradictive because I just drew the Omninous Sea, but I'm actually going to ditch it right now because I see that I can get rid of the Yarok and also get the Rael trigger, which hopefully is going to draw me into a second Omninous Sea or something damn near it. It does in fact draw me into a second Omninous Sea. Obviously I'm running 4 copies, so when I draw 8 cards, there's a fair chance I'm going to draw another one. I see an opportunity to attack with Rael here. He only has 1 mana open, so I figure it's pretty safe. Getting in that little chip damage sometimes can be very helpful. I also have a Merchant of the Veil instant available to me, which I'm going to be able to hopefully proc on their turn. I see the Agent of Treachery come down. That's really not what I want to see. I figure he's going to go after my Rael, but we'll see how it goes. That's kind of worst case scenario if he goes after the Rael. As you can see, he's contemplating it. He obviously doesn't know what I'm running because my deck is not common. He does not go after the Rael, which is good news for me. So I play the Merchant of the Veil trigger while Agent of Treachery is on the stack. So I can get both of the benefits. I'm going to take out his Agent of Treachery. Obviously, he's still going to get the card, but it's an okay trade as far as that goes. Agent of Treachery being a very strong card, obviously. I see the opportunity to play out the Omninous Sea while having the mana to Channel Force with Rael on board. This is kind of the optimal scenario where you want to be. These kinds of plays are huge value with huge swings. This is kind of where the game turns around to a degree. I mean, it's going to be a tough game. You know, their deck's obviously very strong. Channeled Force is kind of an interesting card on how you play it. As you can see, I'm struggling with it a little bit. You have to target yourself first, and then what you want to destroy, and then you have to... Well, first you have to select how many cards you're gonna use as X, and then you have to target yourself to draw the cards. And you have to target the thing you want to destroy, and then you have to physically click the cards to discard it. But as you can see, I just Channel Forced that and drew a lot of cards. Because of the Rael triggers, and that allowed me to get a Kraken immediately off of Omninous Sea. So a pretty good turn. Obviously they're tapped out, so I can hit in with a 5 damage Rael. If you're enjoying these deck techs, please be sure to like and subscribe. That would really help me out. And give me feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. He puts down a Cavalier of Thorns right here. Obviously a very, very strong card. It seems his deck has a high ability for ramp, but his payoffs, I mean, they're good. Agent of Treachery is a fantastic card. So is Cavalier of Thorns and Uro, but I see a lot of these decks that just kind of ramp to infinity. I'm surprised he hasn't played a Krasis yet. I'm going to play out a second Iron Crag Pyromancer, and followed by another Channeled Force. And this combo is starting to get a little silly. I realize I'm churning through my deck very quickly, so I'm not going to full wheel here. I'm actually just going to Channel Force for 3, and then use the Iron Crag Pyromancer triggered ability to finish off the Cavalier. I'm going to pitch one of my Cavalier Flames, the Glinthorn Buccaneer, and the Thrill of Possibility. Thrill of Possibility beefs up Rael's attack, and I don't really need 2 Cavaliers of Flame, considering I would just pitch it anyways. As you can see, I draw a ton of cards. I'm getting a bunch of Omninous Seas triggers. It's going to allow me to activate it once again. I also picked up a Nif Mizzet, which at this stage in the game is very strong. He has a bunch of ramp cards, so they can't really do much to stop me, and I keep removing his actual threats. So Rael's going to rumble in for another 7. As you can see, I'm putting a lot of pressure on him right now. The only thing I really have to look out for is running out of cards. He plays a second Agent of Treachery, which obviously is not great, and he steals one of my Kraken tokens. I'm not sure that was the right play, but it is what it is. I play out my Nif Mizzet, and this is where things get really difficult. That card is so strong. And I play out a Rix Mighty Reveler, which does what it's supposed to do. Get my triggers. It's just a 2-drop, but it is effective. Right here, I'm trying to figure out how many triggers I'm going to get off Niv exactly. I believe it's 2, obviously. Well, not obviously. And then I'm going to get the Iron Crag to take out the Agent of Treachery. Rael's going to draw me a card, give me another trigger. Yep. Getting yet another Omninous Seas. He chooses to block with the Kraken. Not sure I would have done that. But trades off the Kraken. Let's get more. Plays out a Risen Reef. At this point, I'm in a pretty commanding spot. It would be pretty hard for me to lose, so he just surrenders. And yeah, that's basically how the deck functions. If you enjoyed, like I said, be sure to subscribe and like.